Part 20. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 191. The dragon hunting horse flapped its wings, and the surrounding space had a faint feeling of heat. At this time, the blood-stained ancient Buddha, after seeing this scene, had a bit of teasing in his eyes, and a hint of playfulness at the corner of his mouth. At this time, he put his hands together and said Amitba. Then, a lingering force coiled around his body, and that force made people feel unpredictable. Then, at the feet of the burning blood ancient Buddha, a silver-white little snake suddenly appeared. This little snake rose up against the wind and instantly showed a momentum of 10,000 feet. Then, the silver-white little snake actually showed a blood-red color. Red snake, I didn't expect this guy to actually subdue it. No wonder he can survive. The old beggar murmured in a low voice, and there seemed to be a bit of helplessness in his eyes. The bitter smile at the corner of his mouth also began to become more and more obvious. There was a flash of surprise in the old beggar's eyes. There was a bit of disbelief in his eyes. Finally, his brows were knitted together. At this moment, he turned his head and looked at Lin Yu again. His eyes were a little complicated. Little guy, if you don't wake up again, I'm afraid this time, I will die here. At this time, there was a flash of complexity in the old beggar's eyes. At this moment, his brows were knitted together. There was a bit of helplessness in his eyes, and the bitter smile at the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. And just after this moment, the old beggar seemed to suddenly remember something. At this time, he gritted his teeth and flashed a bit of determination in his eyes. You can't get a tiger cub without entering a tiger's den. In this situation, if I don't fight to the death, how can I show my power? After the old beggar finished speaking, he looked up to the sky and laughed, and a long sigh came out of his mouth. The cold aura on his body was quietly released, and a lingering aura gathered quietly above the void. The ferocity in the old beggar's eyes began to become more and more obvious. At this time, he pinched his hands and chanted a spell, and then a lingering aura suddenly rushed out of his body. And just a moment later, the old beggar stood directly in the air, standing above the void, and a majestic aura on his body suddenly enveloped the earth. At this moment, he only heard a cold snort. Xiantian giant dog, come out. When the old beggar finished speaking, everyone felt a turbulence, and then a giant dog suddenly appeared in front of everyone. The giant dog stepped on the void, giving everyone a strong sense of oppression. Even the ancient Buddha of burning blood couldn't help but flash a bit of solemnity in his eyes after seeing this scene. At this time, the brows of the ancient Buddha of burning blood seemed to be locked together. Oh no, this is really going to be bad. The ancient Buddha of burning blood just shook his head slightly, and then a bit of helplessness flashed in his eyes, and a bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Just after this moment, the ancient Buddha of burning blood felt the turbulence of the world around him. At this time, the ancient Buddha of burning blood was gloomy to death, and his complexion became even more ugly. And just a moment later, the burning blood ancient Buddha seemed to suddenly remember something, and the smile on his mouth became more and more obvious. Interesting, who do you think this dog will bite later? The burning blood ancient Buddha said slowly. At this time, Jade Ding Genren seemed to understand something, and then turned his head and looked at the burning blood ancient Buddha, with a little joy in his eyes and eyebrows. I understand what you mean that this dog will help us get rid of an unwelcome guy, right? The burning blood ancient Buddha just nodded lightly, with a bit of teasing in his eyes, and a bit of playfulness at the corners of his mouth, and the joy in his eyes and eyebrows is self-evident. Exotic Beast, Xiantian Giant Dog Epic Level 9, Level 49. Qualification, Alien, Intermediate. Life, 9999999999777. Speed, 9999999999777. Defense, 9999999999777. Attack, 9999999999777. Skills, Suanation's Wrath, Heavenly Dog Eclipse Moon, Myriad Laws Xiantian, Sound of Thunder. Suanation's Wrath, Xiantian Giant Dog activates the skill, emits a long howl from its mouth, can directly attack the soul of others, is a sound wave attack, ordinary people can hardly defend, very powerful, mysterious and strange moves. Heavenly Dog Eclipse Moon, Xiantian Giant Dog activates the skill, if under the moon, can directly swallow the moon, nourish itself with the power of the moonlight, swallow the world into its stomach, the moves are unpredictable, and the ghost is incomparable. 1 for Xiantian, Xiantian Giant Dog activates a skill, which is a domain skill. Domain skills can destroy the world, everything, and directly use the power of the world for their own use. If they are powerful, they can directly swallow up the world. The Sound of Thunder, under the blessing of Tiangu Eclipse Moon, using Suanation's anger can emit rolling thunder, shocking everything in the world, avoiding all monsters and demons, and directly swallowing many monsters. If Xiantian Spring reaches a certain level, it can directly summon the Nine Heavens Mysterious Thunder, so that the Nine Heavens Mysterious Thunder hits the person at that time and directly destroys his soul. This Xiantian Giant Dog is extremely powerful. After seeing this Xiantian Giant Dog, everyone looked at each other, you look at me, I look at you, with a look of confusion and puzzlement in their eyes. At this time, their brows were tightly locked, and their eyes seemed to be twisted together. There was a sense of helplessness in their eyes, and a few bitter smiles were raised at the corners of their mouths. However, General Tianlong was the only one who saw this scene, and the complex meaning in his eyes became even more obvious than before. The old beggar jumped up and stepped on the head of the Xiantian Giant Dog, and then gently touched the head of the Xiantian Giant Dog. This time, the two of us will fight side by side. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 192. The giant Xiantian dog just made a whining sound, seeming to express its determination. After hearing the sound of Xiantian Giant Dog, the old beggar's eyes were quite excited, and then he saw the old beggar suddenly stepping forward. At this moment, Lin Yu seemed to remember a voice in his mind, and he saw a flash of golden light, and then, an egg suddenly appeared in his palm. Lin Yu's eyes carefully studied the egg in his hand. There was a bit of complexity in his eyes. There was a very mysterious and strange pattern on this egg. This pattern gave people a mysterious appearance and a sense of mystery. An unpredictable state. Please ask the master if you want to open it. Arya was staring straight at Lin Yu, her eyes seemed a bit complicated. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Arya said, his eyes were quite confused, and then he raised his eyebrows slightly. Open. When these two words came out of Lin Yu's mouth, he saw a flash of golden light, and then the egg in his hand slowly began to crack. The cracks gradually spread bit by bit, until the last little fish broke out of the shell. This little fish looked quite weird. When Arya saw this little monster, she spoke to Lin Yu calmly. The classic of mountains and seas, it is recorded in Jiaoming Mountain, that the Jiao water comes out and flows westward into the river. There are many fish of Holuo in it, 1 song and 10 bodies, and its sound is like a barking dog. At this time, Lin Yu also saw He Lu Yu's data panel. Alien Beast, Holuo Epic Level 10, Level 49. Qualification, Alien, Top. Life, 99999999999. Speed, 99999999999. Defense, 99999999999. Attack, 99999999999. Skills, Wrath of the River God, Power of the Sea God, Raging Waves, Crazy Sea Domain. Wrath of the River God, He Lu Yu activates his skill. The nearest river god was summoned by He Lu Yu with the appearance of thunder, his majestic attitude, and his vast power, he forcibly intimidated one of them. The river god is help, destroy all monsters and monsters. The power of the sea god, he Liu activates his skills and turns his 10 tails into a wild sea. Above this wild sea, there is a vast and boundless majestic soul floating around, intimidating the world, making all people's souls attracted by this. He Liu shocked, the raging waves can swallow up all enemies in the world. Raging waves, he Liu activates his skills to engulf the world. 3,000 Tao soldiers, based on these 3,000 Tao soldiers, set off a raging wave. The raging waves surge into the sky, engulfing all the demons in the world. Crazy Sea Domain, he Liu activates his skills to directly summon a vast ocean. This ocean is called the Sea of Jiaoming. It is the territory of He Liu. All people or animals in the sea area are all controlled by He Liu, extremely powerful and terrifying. In the past, according to Lin Yu's knowledge, the highest level of these strange beasts was only the 9th level, but now the strange beasts in the Book of Mountains and Seas not only have extraordinary qualifications, but probably the most unexpected thing is that these strange beasts can actually. The existence of the 10th level was really unexpected by everyone. And at this moment, Lin Yu seemed to have suddenly remembered something. At this time, his face twisted slightly, a bit of heaviness flashed in his eyes, and then he did this. Narrowed his eyes, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. It's interesting, it's really interesting. These strange beasts seem to be the strange beasts in the Book of Mountains and Seas. The strange beasts in the Book of Mountains and Seas are all extraordinary. I think the legendary beasts can be worthy of entering the 10th realm. There should be no other strange beasts except these strange beasts in the classic of Mountains and Seas. When Lin Yu thought of this, his eyes seemed to be quite complicated, and then there was a hint of kindness in the corners of his eyes and brows. At this time, he also frowned together. The corner of his mouth also evoked a bit of a wry smile. This is indeed a matter worth celebrating, but at the same time, this matter is not so joyful. After all, there are so many high-level exotic beasts, and the elixirs needed to upgrade them will definitely be extraordinary. And not only that, in addition to these extraordinary elixirs, there is another thing that is also quite rare. Such a thing probably, the points required to redeem these alien beast bullets in the classic of Mountains and Seas would be an astronomical figure. After Lin Yu thought of this, his eyes were dull, and there was a bit of helplessness in his eyes, and a wry smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. At this time, Master Yuding's eyes were also very vicious. Of course, he could tell that Lin Yu was about to complete his magic skill at this moment, so at this time, there was a bit of coldness in his eyes, and he seemed to understand a little more at this moment. Like something. No, we absolutely cannot let this guy continue like this. If it goes on for a while, I'm afraid it will be impossible for us to deal with this guy again. Master Yuding's cold snort woke everyone up. After everyone heard what Master Yuding said, they seemed to understand something. At this time, they also nodded heavily, and then suddenly moved towards Lin Yu. Come straight ahead. The Burning Blood Ancient Buddha turned his head and glanced at Master Yuding and General Tianlong. There was a bit of coldness in his eyes, and the corners of his eyes and eyebrows seemed to be quite gloomy. This little guy has just begun to mature. I'd better stop this old beggar first. You guys find a way to kill this little guy as soon as possible, otherwise things will change if you wait too long. After the Burning Blood Ancient Buddha finished speaking, Master Yuding suddenly flew forward. In just one breath, just in this brief moment, Master Yuding controlled the 3 people. The 2 winged beasts suddenly rushed towards Lin Yu. After seeing this scene, the old beggar looked slightly shocked. A bit of gloom flashed in his eyes at this moment, and then he suddenly rushed straight towards Master Yuding. Asshole, damn it! If you want to touch this little guy, you have to pass the old age first. After Master Yuding heard what the old beggar said, he only had a slight sneer at the corner of his mouth, and a bit of contempt flashed in his eyes. He didn't take the old beggar seriously at all. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Sheng Chong. Chapter 193. Your opponent is me. Before the old beggar came to the side of Master Yuding, a man blocked the old beggar's path, preventing him from coming forward. The old beggar turned his head towards Master Yuding, and gave him a cold glance. There seemed to be a bit of coldness flashing through his eyes, and the coldness between his eyebrows began to become more and more cold. It became obvious. At this time, after seeing this scene, Master Yuding suddenly felt murderous intent, and his murderous intent suddenly appeared. The gloomy feeling seemed a bit unpredictable. Old guy, I didn't expect that you actually dared to stop me. I think you are just eating the courage of a bear's heart and a leopard. After hearing what Master Yuding said, the old beggar just waved his hand gently. Don't be so arrogant. Who will lose and who will win is still unknown. Who will live and who will die? It's also a later story. There was quite a bit of arrogance in the old beggar's words. Of course he could feel the terrifying aura contained in Lin Yu at this moment, so at this time, his eyes were even more, it aroused a bit of excitement, and there was even a bit of joy on the corner of the mouth. At this time, Master Yuding's face suddenly sank, and he turned his head and glanced at General Tianlong. You go first. Naturally, the Burning Blood Ancient Buddha was not someone to be trifled with. The Burning Blood Ancient Buddha manipulated the Red Buddha snake and suddenly bit towards the old beggar like this. Their speed was amazing. Extremely fast, just between this breath and this short moment, the Red Buddha snake bit towards the old beggar's back. The old beggar seemed to have eyes on his back at this moment. At this moment, he could only see a slight sneer on the corner of his mouth, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Asshole! The old beggar let out a cold snort, and then he just lightly stamped his foot. The Xiantian giant dog suddenly opened its bloody mouth and aimed at the 7-inch Red Buddha snake. Just bit it? Although this Red Buddha snake is said to be an ancient beast, it cannot escape the word snake after all. It is always good to hit the snake within 7 inches. The Red Buddha snake twisted its body into an extremely weird arc, and then suddenly flicked its tail. Just in this brief moment, the Red Buddha snake entangled its body into an extremely weird posture. And just after this moment, just in this moment, the Red Buddha snake suddenly swung its tail and hit the Xiantian giant dog hard. This giant Xiantian dog actually had no intention of dodging. It seized the opportunity and bit the Red Buddha snake within 7 inches. And at this moment, the three-legged and two-winged beast suddenly flew toward the old beggar. The three-legged and two-winged beast was extremely fast. In just a moment, it had arrived in front of the old beggar, and then it suddenly waved its wings towards the old beggar. It cut through, and for a moment, the three-legged and two-winged beast seemed to want to completely cut open the old beggar. At this time, the old beggar suddenly turned sideways, and then directly avoided the attack of the three-legged and two-winged beast. The speed of this three-legged and two-winged beast was extremely fast, and it was just a breath of silence. In one breath, he was completely blown away. The old beggar took several steps back before finally managing to stabilize his body. At this time, his eyes were fixed on the three-legged and two-winged beast. At this moment, General Tianlong just stepped on Tianlong's hunting horse, and suddenly swept away in the distance. General Tianlong's speed was so fast that it was impossible to predict his movements. In just this breath, just in this short moment, General Tianlong suddenly came to Lin Yu. But at this time, Lin Yu had no intention of waking up. And just after this moment, Lin Yu seemed to suddenly understand something. At this time, a slight sneer appeared on the corner of his mouth, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. The murderous intent on his body emerged like this. At this time, General Tianlong still did not understand the danger of this incident at all, and just a moment later, General Tianlong suddenly discovered an ethereal and vast aura, which emanated from Lin Yu's body. General Tianlong gritted his teeth, a cold light flashed in his eyes, and a murderous intention emerged quietly from his body. At this moment, he seemed to have made up his mind, just wanting to completely kill him. Lin Yu was put to death, but at this moment Lin Yu suddenly opened his eyes. A bit of coldness flashed in his eyes, and a cold aura radiated from his body. Out. Immediately afterwards, Lin Yu jumped up suddenly. His speed was extremely fast. In just one breath, he had already arrived in front of General Tianlong, and then he just grabbed him with his backhand. And then the Tianlong blood blade was directly caught in his palm. Perhaps because General Tianlong suffered heavy losses in the previous battle with the old beggar, General Tianlong was unable to dodge for a while. At this time, the old beggar's eyes were full of joy. The Burning Blood Ancient Buddha and Jade Ding Genren looked at each other, and a bitter smile appeared on their lips. In their eyes, there was a kind of helplessness. The Burning Blood Ancient Buddha suddenly flew forward, and then stepped in front of Lin Yu, and then he grabbed Lin Yu. Lin Yu's face suddenly became ugly. The old beggar was naturally not a vegetarian. He suddenly flew forward, and then, he pushed the Burning Blood Ancient Buddha heavily on the back. The Burning Blood Ancient Buddha spit out a mouthful of blood, and his eyes were full of disbelief. At this time, the blood-stained Ancient Buddha had a few cold flashes in his eyes, and the murderous intent on his body was revealed without reservation. Lin Yu was of course not a vegetarian. He turned around and kicked the Burning Blood Ancient Buddha out again. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 194. At this time, the Burning Blood Ancient Buddha climbed up with difficulty. He slowly raised his head, his eyes staring at Lin Yu, his fists clattering, and the murderous intent on his body was even more intense. It appeared vaguely, and he gritted his teeth at this time. Asshole, damn it! At this time, Lin Yu was too lazy to talk nonsense to these guys. He just waved his hand lightly, and then softly uttered 3 words from his mouth. Horofish. When these 3 words came out of his mouth, everyone felt a surge of coercion. The suspenseful aura seemed to make everyone feel nervous from the bottom of their hearts. I felt a strong sense of oppression. All the people just looked at each other, you looked at me, I looked at you, they didn't know what to say for a moment, their faces started to look ugly. After Lin Yu saw this scene, the sneer at the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. At this time, he just looked around, glanced at it, and then shook his head. I admit that you are all seniors who have been famous for a long time, but the boy is not allowed to be bullied or slaughtered. Today I leave my words here. This time, the people around me took advantage of my weakness. One day, I will definitely give it back twice as much. After Lin Yu said this, he suddenly stepped forward. After these people sensed the terrifying aura from the ancient world emanating from He Lu Yu, these people their faces suddenly became ugly, and they were looking at each other in confusion at this moment. Boy, you are just a mere brat. I really don't know who gave you the courage to talk to us like this, but I will leave it here. No matter what I say, this time you will definitely die. After the man finished speaking, he suddenly dodged forward and came to Lin Yu. If this man wasn't General Tianlong, who else could he be? This General Tianlong is quite bloody, but Burning Blood Ancient Buddha and Yuding Genren think more about their own section after all, the sect is at the top, and other things are not important. At this moment, there was a cry of warblers in the sky, and then after General Tianlong heard the cry of warblers, his face suddenly flashed with a bit of solemnity in his eyes. At this time, he gently stretched out his hand. One of my own arms. Then, the eagle landed steadily on the arm of Master Jade Cauldron. At this time, Master Jade Cauldron gently untied the piece of paper tied to the eagle's leg. At this time, General Tianlong opened the note so gently, and his face suddenly flashed with a bit of disbelief in his eyes. At this time, his brows seemed to be tightened together. General Tianlong's expression was slightly startled, and there was something strange in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but shook his head slightly. How is this possible? How could my empire suffer from floods? At this time, he turned his head and glanced at He Luyu. General Tianlong's expression became ugly, and his eyes were fixed on Lin Yu. Is it your fault? Is it because of you that my hometown is suffering from such floods? Tell me quickly. At this time, General Tianlong was already a bit hysterical. After Lin Yu heard what General Tianlong said, there was only a disdainful sneer at the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were full of contempt. I really don't understand. Who told you that the floods in your hometown are related to me? And who told you that Lu Yu will definitely cause floods? General Tianlong took a deep breath and calmed down his mood a little. His eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and a bone-chilling chill suddenly rose up. Now is not the time for joking, you have to recognize the reality. I don't care if it's a joke or not. I only give you one chance today. Leave quickly. I can let you go. If you continue to be stubborn and insist on staying here, then this place will be yours grave, I do what I say. Everyone's eyes were staring at each other. Although General Tianlong was unwilling to do so, in the Empire of 10,000 Beasts, there was an urgent need for flood relief, so although he felt helpless at the moment, he could only can leave first. General Tianlong gave a fist-cup salute to Master Yuding and Burning Blood Ancient Buddha. I'm sorry for what happened today. The Empire is ill and I have to go back. Please bear with me. After General Tianlong finished speaking, he was so direct and turned around to leave without looking back. Master Yuding's eyes stared straight at the back of General Tianlong, and then he couldn't help but shook his head and sighed heavily. Now that the people from the 10,000 Beasts Empire have left, if this little guy really has such great eyesight behind him, we will be the only two families who are at peace with each other, but the benefits will be in vain for their family. Got it, this is really not good. The Burning Blood Buddha certainly understood the concerns of Jade Ding Genren. To be honest, Jade Ding Genren's concerns were exactly the concerns of the Burning Blood Buddha. Moreover, even if the two of them were to face this ancient beast 2-on-2, He Luyu might not be a match. At this time, Jade Ding Genren just sighed heavily, and then shook his head. Well, let's stop for now. Even if you are lucky this time, we will never change our mountains and rivers. We will definitely meet again in the future. When that time comes, don't blame us for turning our faces and not recognizing you. Lin Yu's mouth just raised a few sneers. That's all. Who will not let go of whom at that time is still uncertain. The Burning Blood Buddha and Jade Ding Genren looked at each other and turned away. At this time, the old beggar couldn't hold it in any longer after they walked away, and a mouthful of blood actually spurted out directly. The old beggar's eyes were filled with helplessness, and a bitter smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. I can't help it, I can't help it. I have to give up my old bones. I can't defy fate. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 195. I don't think so. The Empire of 10,000 Beasts. At this time, a middle-aged man began to push some fat and big-eared people into the river, and these people knelt down and begged for mercy. Bai Hanshin snorted coldly, it's useless even if the Emperor comes to plead for you today. Listen to me honestly, otherwise I will make you look good. What if I plead for them? After hearing what the Lord of the Empire of 10,000 Beasts said, Bai Hanshin's eyes were obviously a little confused, but the Lord of the Empire of 10,000 Beasts didn't ask him to look up, so he naturally didn't dare to look up. The Lord of the Empire of 10,000 Beasts looked around and just waved his hand casually, no need to be polite, stand up. Thank you, Your Majesty. After hearing what the Lord of the Empire of 10,000 Beasts just said, these gentry, wealthy people, and officials were full of joy on their faces. They looked so arrogant that they wished they could even skip the ceremony of kneeling. "Your Majesty, please think twice." They were wrong this time. If your Majesty still pleads for them, it will only chill the hearts of the people of the world. The common people here never thought that Baihanjin would dare to contradict the emperor. This can be regarded as risking his life to make a suggestion. After hearing what Baihanjin said, the people's good impression of Baihanjin doubled. Everyone thought that the king of the 10,000 Beasts Empire would be angry. After all, in front of the world, someone dared to go against his will and confront him. No emperor in the past dynasties would allow anyone to do this. But at this time, the king of the 10,000 Beasts Empire just smiled and shook his head. "Do you understand the path that Confucius pursued?" "Of course I understand. Teach students in accordance with their aptitude, and teach everyone." If a court official does not know the words and deeds of Confucius, it would be a joke, but I don't understand. What does this have to do with this matter? The king of the 10,000 Beasts Empire smiled and shook his head. "Confucius believes that there are differences between people. Why don't you understand the differences between people? These wealthy merchants and court officials, if they are forced to go into the water, I am afraid they can only delay the rescue of them." After hearing what the king of the 10,000 Beasts Empire said, these wealthy merchants, as well as the relatives of these officials, were all excited. "Your Majesty is right. We really can't do such rough work." After seeing this, He Shuhuan's eyes were full of confusion. At this moment, he thought in his heart, "Your Majesty is not such a foolish person, but why did he do such a foolish thing this time? What will happen?" However, He Shuhuan also understood that the current emperor made him more and more confused. And the people around here, after hearing what the Lord of the 10,000 Beasts Empire said, their eyes were obviously a little dim. The corners of the Lord of the 10,000 Beasts Empire's mouth were raised with a bit of evil smile. Yes, they are not good at repairing in this flood, but there is one thing they are very good at. "May I ask your Majesty, in addition to plundering the people's fat and blood, I really don't know what else they can be good at." "They have silver." The Lord of the 10,000 Beasts Empire gently spit out 4 words from his mouth. The wealthy merchants, the gentry, and the officials all looked ugly after hearing what the king of the 10,000 Beasts Empire said. "Your Majesty, didn't we donate before?" a fat, oily-faced merchant said weakly from a distance. The king of the 10,000 Beasts Empire slowly walked in front of him. "Your silk is good, you must have made a lot of money over the years." The man shook his head like a wave drum, waving his hands continuously. "No, no, no, your Majesty is just making a big joke. My silk business has been declining over the years. Silk can't be spun at all. Many stores have even closed down. Please understand." The king of the 10,000 Beasts Empire nodded gently, and then looked at Zhu Qi. Zhu Qi instantly understood what the king of the 10,000 Beasts Empire meant. He walked in front of the man and threw him into the water. The man struggled in the water for a few times and then floated up. 100,000 taels of silver, plus 1,000 stones of grain, can keep a person from going into the water. Those who can't take it out can do as the caregiver said, and those who can take it out can go home to eat, drink and rest well. This way it will be very good." After hearing what the Lord of the 10,000 Beasts Empire said, the common people and Baihanjin were full of excitement. Before the disaster, money and grain are the most important. The Lord of the 10,000 Beasts Empire certainly understands this truth. One more tael of silver may even save a person's life. He is indeed a wise ruler of the time. Thank you, Emperor. Thank you, Emperor." The people actually knelt on the ground one after another. The Lord of the 10,000 Beasts Empire looked up, and 2 lines of tears passed through the corners of his eyes. "You are all my people. Of course I have to think about you. Why do you need to do this?" He Shuhuan nodded one after another. Of course he knew one thing. If these wealthy merchants had a good talk with them, they would definitely not take out the money. In fact, it proved that what the leader of the 10,000 Beasts Empire did was indeed right. As long as you force them, the money will be like the water in the sponge, there will always be some squeeze. None of these wealthy merchants and officials were willing to get into the water. Even the fat man from before struggled to climb up and paid the first portion of money. In just half a day, they once again collected 30 million taels of silver and 300,000 she of food for disaster relief. Bai Hanchen looked at the mountain of food in front of him, and 2 lines of tears flashed in his eyes. Your Majesty is wise. With these literati and so much food, the people in the disaster area can be saved. On behalf of the people in the disaster area, I kneel down to thank our Lord for his great kindness. The Lord of the Beast Empire helped Bai Hanchen up. These are all my people, so why do I need to call you like this? However, the construction of water conservancy projects is imminent. This time I call you, not just to preside over disaster relief, but to think of a solution that can be solved once and for all. This method will not only cure this flood, but also eliminate future troubles. Do you have confidence? Bai Hanchen had a look of danger on his face. Although he was an upright official and could maintain his integrity without corruption or bribery, he knew very well that there were specialties in this profession and he was not good at it at all. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji-Sheng Chang. Chapter 196. Bai Hanchen never expected that the king of the 10,000 Beasts Empire would play such a big game. He was originally full of confidence, but now he was a little hesitant. Your Majesty, this flood has been going on for a long time. I am not very knowledgeable, I am afraid. The king of the 10,000 Beasts Empire slowly turned his head and stared at Bai Hanchen. Bai Hanchen swallowed the half-sentenced words. After a moment, Bai Hanchen gritted his teeth and said, Your Majesty, I will do it for you even if I die. The king of the 10,000 Beasts Empire nodded with satisfaction and patted Bai Hanchen on the shoulder gently. In half a month, I will give you away. At that time, you only need to do it according to what is said above. This is not difficult for you. At this time, although Bai Hanchen didn't know what the king of the 10,000 Beasts Empire was up to, he still nodded gently. At this time, General Tianlong's eyes were full of joy, and the lord of the 10,000 Beasts Empire waved his hand gently towards him. Come here and tell me about that matter in detail. At this time, after everyone left, the old beggar spit out blood, and everyone's eyes were a little worried, and their faces were a little panicked. At this time, they surrounded him, staring at the old beggar. Are you okay? Several people came over slowly at this time, and the leader held a folding fan in his hand. After the man gently spread out the folding fan, a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. When the old beggar saw this guy, his face suddenly flashed a little strange, and his eyes were staring at a guy so hard that his eyebrows seemed to be cut together. Why are you here? You are not welcome here. The king of Guzhu gently spread out his folding fan, with a faint smile on his lips, and a playful look in his eyes. Old man, you still want to be strong now. Even if I let you be strong this time, how long can you be strong? Your life is important, do you understand? The king of Guzhu's eyes were fixed on the old beggar, and the bitter smile on the corner of the old beggar's mouth at this time began to become more and more obvious. You can't save me. The king of Guzhu flashed to the old beggar's side. In just one breath, he came to the old beggar. At this time, he gently passed a breath of spiritual power to the old beggar. At this time, the old beggar only felt a surge of surging around him, and after a moment, he spurted out a mouthful of blood. The old beggar's eyes seemed to be quite helpless. What do you want to do? I know you are a lunatic, but sometimes it is better not to be so crazy. The king of Guzhu just waved his hand gently and smiled. You don't need to worry about these things for the time being, you just need to listen to me and do it. The old beggar's eyes were full of helplessness, and a bitter smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. What do you want to do? Explain this to me clearly. At this moment, the king of Guzhu pointed to the southwest. There may be a way to save you in my brother's tomb, but this time I need to take this little guy with me. The king of Guzhu said, pointing at Lin Yu. At this time, the old beggar also shook his head towards Lin Yu, but from the old beggar's eyes, Lin Yu saw some love and care like an elder. King Guzhu ignored the old beggar. He came directly to Lin Yu, then turned his head and looked at Lin Yu. A meaningful smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were staring at Lin Yu. I have a way to save this old guy, but I don't know if you are willing to go with me. At this time, Lin Yu looked at King Guzhu, and his eyes were quite complicated. His brows could not help but frown slightly, and then he sighed quietly. I want to go with you, but you have to tell me where to go. What to do? Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on King Guzhu. At this time, King Guzhu suddenly started to laugh. He turned his head and stared at Lin Yu with a playful look in his eyes. What do you think? Lin Yu thought for a moment, then nodded gently. When King Guzhu saw Lin Yu nod, his eyes were full of excitement. At this time, King Guzhu pointed at the people behind him. This is the male snake man, this is the grave keeper, and this is General Yin Yang. Lin Yu glanced at them. The male snake man was petite and cute, but his face was quite pale. The grave keeper had shadows in his eyes. General Yin Yang wore a half mask, but the other half of his face was very handsome. I think he should have been a handsome man at the beginning. At this time, Lin Yu nodded slightly, with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. King Guzhu glanced at Lin Yu with a bit of confusion in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but raised his eyebrows slightly. What are you laughing at all of a sudden? Is what I said so funny? King Guzhu's eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu. There seemed to be some complexity in his eyes. There was a coldness in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. That kind of coldness made people shudder. It is a kind of majesty that can only be found in those who have been in high positions for a long time. Lin Yu just shook his head. It's not funny, I just remembered something suddenly. I hope you don't mind it? At this time, when King Guzhu heard what Lin Yu said, his eyes seemed to be quite complicated, and then he shook his head. Without further delay, let's set off immediately. It took about 3 days and 3 nights of marching before a few of them arrived at the tomb. But as soon as they opened the wooden door, General Yin Yang seemed to have gone crazy and attacked Lin Yu. Lin Yu pulled away to dodge, but General Yin Yang still refused to let him go, just wanting to kill Lin Yu. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 197. At this time, Lin Yu turned around and glanced at Guzhu King, with a bit of confusion and doubt in his eyes. A wry smile appeared on King Guzhu's lips. It seems that the miasma in the tomb caused him to lose his mind. You just need to open up his Tiangang appointment. Of course, Lin Yu understood that this was King Guzhu testing him, but at this time, he was not afraid at all. He just dodged sideways, and then suddenly moved towards the descendants of General Yin Yang. Such a heavy blow caused General Yin Yang to spit out a mouthful of blood. Then his face became brighter and brighter than before. At this time, Lin Yu just spread his hands and smiled. How about it? The king of Guzhu also nodded slightly. He never expected that Lin Yu's methods would be so brilliant. At this time, a bit of joy flashed across his eyes and brows. It's really good, I admire you very much, but just after he stopped, not long after, the Yin-Yang general actually attacked Lin Yu again. Lin Yu looked around and spotted 7 oil lamps at a glance, which looked particularly strange. This is not flatulence at all, this is the effect of this formation. Let's find a way to subdue him first, but before that, we must guard our minds and never let our minds get lost. Otherwise, even the great Ludo Immortal will it's hard to save even if you go down to earth. The king of Guzhu never expected that the little guy in front of him would be so powerful. At this time, he also nodded slightly. Even the king of Guzhu had to admit that at first, even he didn't notice anything unusual here. It was only later that he reluctantly discovered it. At this time, the king of Guzhu looked at Lin Yu with a bit more respect. Lin Yu glanced around and suddenly found that the shadow of General Yin Yang in the distance was a little vague. He thought he was being controlled by someone. Ever since, the previous scene appeared. After a moment, Lin Yu suddenly turned towards Yin Yang, and the general's heavenly spirit covered such a heavy point. At this time, General Yin Yang's eyes were a little clearer. Lin Yu just breathed a sigh of relief. After General Yin Yang saw Lin Yu, the corners of his mouth curled up into a bitter smile, and his eyes were full of helplessness. Of course he understood one thing very well, that is, the guy in front of him was simply not something he could handle. At this time, General Yin and Yang's eyes were full of helplessness, and the corner of his mouth was even more wry. At this time, his eyes were fixed directly on Lin Yu's body, and a wave of the killing intent was released so quietly. Asshole, damn it! After Lin Yu heard what General Yin Yang said, a slight sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. How dare a defeated general speak bravely? Has he forgotten how he was defeated just now? At this time, General Yin Yang's eyes flashed with a bit of coldness, and a murderous intention on his body was looming and revealed like this. Okay, let's forget it this time, but you will take me with you for the rest of the journey. No matter what, I must see my lord. After General Yin Yang finished speaking, he put away his ghost blade. Everyone looked at General Yin Yang, and their eyes were quite complicated. At this time, they really wanted to. I don't understand why General Yin Yang is so loyal. At this moment, General Yin Yang's words completely exposed Lin Yu to the king of Guzhu. King Guzhu turned his head and glanced in Lin Yu's direction. A somewhat meaningful smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. The smile was Lin Yu's, and it made him shudder. It's interesting, it's really interesting. How do you think he knows that my brother's spirit is still there? As a younger brother, I can't sense the existence of my brother's spirit. It doesn't make sense that he, an outsider, can sense it. You think so? King Guzhu turned his head, his eyes fixed on Lin Yu, and at this time, Lin Yu forced a smile on his lips. Maybe it's because of some other reasons. What exactly is it? I don't quite understand, but I didn't say anything to him. At this time, General Yin Yang turned his head and glanced towards them. Lin Yu's eyes suddenly condensed. Of course, General Yin Yang knew what kind of character King Guzhu was, so he naturally didn't dare to say anything random. At this time, General Yin Yang also had a somewhat meaningful smile on his lips, and a hint of complexity flashed in his eyes. You don't have to make random guesses. I have lived in this tomb for such a long time. How could I not feel the presence of my lord? King Guzhu turned his head and glanced coldly at General Yin Yang. At this moment, his brows suddenly came together, but after a moment, his brows straightened out. And then he suddenly laughed like this. Ha ha ha, yes, yes, what you said is indeed true. It would be great if you could feel my brother's soul. As a younger brother, I have really missed my brother for so many years. I just hope that the two of us can reunion, this is the best. Although the king of Guzhu said this, his eyes clearly flashed with a few shadows, and finally his eyes flashed with a few cold lights, and the vague murderous intent on his body also quietly emerged. At this time, his eyes were full of coldness. The king of Guzhu walked forward slowly, and at this time, Lin Yu stared at the king of Guzhu from a distance, with a few strange colors flashing in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly. At that time, the two looked at each other, and after a moment, the king of Guzhu seemed to suddenly remember something. In just a moment, the king of Guzhu suddenly came in front of Lin Yu, and then the two walked out side by side. Lin Yu's steps were very firm, and there was quite a bit of decisiveness in this firmness. Not only that, his rhythm was rhythmic, and it seemed to guide other people's heartbeats. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Sheng Chong. Chapter 198. At this time, the king of Guzhu turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu. There was a mocking look in the corners of his eyes and brows, and there was a faint smile on the corners of his mouth. Little guy, there are some things that you can't control. If you do these things to me, your end will be miserable. So I advise you not to do these things to me. King Guzhu's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu. At this moment, after Lin Yu heard what King Guzhu said, a bit of complexity flashed in his eyes, and the corners of his eyes and eyebrows rose in surprise. A bit of a strange brilliance. And just after this moment, Lin Yu seemed to understand something in just this brief moment. At this time, he raised his hand and gave a respectful fist-cup salute to the king of Guzhu. Your Majesty, please be aware of this. I have something strange. It's not right for me to do whatever I want in front of you. The corners of Guzhu King's lips evoked a hint of a faint smile, and a bit of coldness flashed through his eyes. At this moment, his eyes were just like this, staring at Lin Yu, and there was a kind of coldness in his body. The murderous intention was even more looming on the surface. And just after this moment, Lin Yu seemed to suddenly understand something. He suddenly took a step forward, and then he galloped forward. In just a short moment, Lin Yubian had already arrived in front of a lampstand, and the lamp was off at this time. King Guzhu suddenly dodged to Lin Yu's side, turned his head, and stared directly at Lin Yu. His eyes seemed to be somewhat confused. What's going on? Why are you so suspicious, and why are you like this? At this moment, Lin Yu pointed forward so gently. Everyone glanced in the direction of Lin Yu's finger. When they saw 7 identical lampstands, they seemed to understand something, and they seemed not to understand something. Lin Yu's expression condensed slightly, the corners of his eyes and brows revealed a hint of helplessness, and a wry smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. Oh, it seems to be fate. Who could have expected that things would turn out like this? In fact, if you look at it in detail, it seems that your brother didn't have to die back then. After General Yin Yang heard what Lin Yu said, he suddenly turned his head and stared at the king of Guzhu in front of him. Your Majesty, as far as I know, you seem to be the only one alive at the time, but before my lord died, it seemed that you were also by his side. General Yin Yang's voice was quite cold, and the corners of his eyes and brows were completely cold. At this time, after the king of Guzhu heard what General Yin Yang said, he suddenly turned his head and glanced coldly towards him, with a bit of cold murderous intent in his eyes. It became more and more obvious. Even so, so what? Or do you think I will harm myself, my dear brother? The eyes of King Guzhu were fixed on General Yin Yang. At this time, after General Yin Yang heard what King Guzhu said, his eyes and eyebrows were completely helpless. And just after this moment, General Yin Yang suddenly took a few steps back, his eyes fixed on the murderous intention on the king of Guzhu, and it was even more vaguely revealed. And just after this moment, King Guzhu gently opened the folding fan in his hand. At this time, he gently shook his head and turned around, his eyes fixed on General Yin Yang. A somewhat angry smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, and there was a certain coldness in his eyes. Are you sure you want to be my enemy? At this time, King Guzhu spoke in an unhurried tone. He turned his head, his eyes were fixed on General Yin Yang, and there was even a hint of vagueness at the corner of his mouth. The smile and the murderous intent on his body were suddenly revealed. Just with this breath, General Yin Yang felt the cold sweat on his back. At this moment, his back seemed to be completely soaked in cold sweat. The king of Guzhu took a deep breath. At this time, his eyes were quite complicated, and the cold murderous intent in his body was released without reservation. And just for a moment, General Yin Yang's eyes flashed with some strange brilliance. At this time, cold sweat was pouring from his forehead, and his eyes were full of panic when he looked at the king of Guzhu. A moment later he couldn't help but swallowed like this. You. The king of Guzhu slowly took his steps and pushed towards General Yin Yang step by step. At this time, General Yin Yang's eyes and brows all showed a sense of helplessness, and he subconsciously stepped back a few steps. Stepping forward, there was a look of fear in his eyes. What am I? What do you want to say? Just say whatever you want to say, you're welcome. The Guzhu king's tone was neither urgent nor slow, but at this moment, General Yin Yang just collapsed on the ground, his eyes dull, as if his muscles and bones had been taken away. At this moment, watching the palm of King Guzhu slightly bend, others may not be able to see it, but Lin Yu can see it clearly. A white breath slowly gathered from the top of General Yin Yang's head to the palm of King Guzhu, which seemed to make people look quite frightened. Then, General Yin Yang's body began to spread, revealing an extremely violent momentum. At this time, General Yin Yang was ready to go all out, and at this moment, Lin Yu suddenly stepped forward, came to the side of General Yin Yang, and then patted his shoulder lightly. The violent momentum on General Yin Yang's body stopped at this moment, and then Lin Yu turned his head and looked at King Guzhu. King Guzhu also snorted coldly, and then directly retracted his palm power. At this time, King Guzhu's eyes were fixed on the front, and there was a bit of coldness in General Yin Yang's eyes at this time. A violent momentum suddenly emanated from his body. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 199. Then, King Guzhu suddenly took a step forward, and then a violent aura suddenly emitted from his body. But General Yin Yang didn't seem to be afraid at this moment. At this time, his eyes were quite resolute and courageous, and the cold aura on his body made people feel some inexplicable respect. After Lin Yu saw the scene in the distance, he recalled what happened just after opening the tomb door. When he opened the tomb door, he indeed saw a person's spirit body. The man told Lin Yu something very cautiously, and in the end he told himself to be careful about King Guzhu. For some reason, Lin Yu actually believed in what that man said. He had never thought that the king of Guzhu was a good person. So at this time, Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the king of Guzhu, as if he wanted to get some clues from the king of Guzhu. A moment later, King Guzhu also felt Lin Yu's gaze. There was only a hint of a faint smile on the corner of his mouth, which seemed to be 3 parts mocking and 7 parts sarcastic. At this time, Lin Yu was furious. He suddenly stepped forward, and then came to the Yin Yang general's side, his eyes fixed on the Guzhu king. He is indeed loyal to your brother, but there seems to be nothing wrong with this, right? Your brother is dead, do you want to kill all his subordinates too? The king of Guzhu gently unfolded his folding fan and fanned his chest so gently, and then a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. What do I want to do? I don't need you, a little guy, to teach me. You are a young kid who also wants to make trouble in front of me. You are worthy of it? After King Guzhu finished speaking, the cold aura on his body was suddenly released. His eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and there was a bit of coldness surging in his eyes. At this time, Lin Yu's face flashed with a bit of coldness, and a murderous intention was looming out of his body. You can eat indiscriminately, but you can't talk indiscriminately. Talking indiscriminately will kill people. Lin Yu's eyes were just like this, staring at the king of Guzhu, and at this moment, the king of Guzhu was like this, suddenly laughing, and there seemed to be a bit of mockery in his eyes. "What do you want?" "That's what I said, what can you do? You know better and don't disturb me here. Otherwise, don't blame me for being rude to you." The Guzhu King's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and there was a murderous intention in his body that was looming or not. A moment later, Lin Yu seemed to suddenly remember something. At this time, he suddenly laughed. "Interesting, it's really interesting. To put it in detail, it's almost ridiculous. You must have forgotten the purpose of coming to us this time, right? Or maybe you did it deliberately because you wanted to take advantage of me, and made up such a high-sounding story. Reason, right?" After the king of Guzhu heard what Lin Yu said, he was speechless for a while. At this time, his eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and there seemed to be a bit of coldness on his face. "Moving? So what? So what if it's not? If you come here this time and you listen to me obediently, I will definitely be able to take you out safely. If you are stubborn and insist on going against me, then you won't be able to do anything. It's my fault for being rude to you." King Guzhu and Lin Yu just stood opposite each other. The two of them looked at each other like this. The coldness in their eyes began to become more and more obvious. A cold and ethereal aura quietly appeared. It emanated from Lin Yu's body. In just this brief moment, Lin Yu seemed to suddenly understand something, and a sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. "You really want to take advantage of me? If that's the case, I think there's nothing left to talk about between us." After Lin Yu finished speaking, he wanted to get up and leave. At this time, the king of Guzhu suddenly came to Lin Yu's side and blocked Lin Yu's way. "Little guy, do you want to leave? Do I allow you to leave? This place is easy for you to come to, but if you want to leave, I'm afraid it will be a little difficult." King Guzhu's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu's body, and the coldness in his eyes became more obvious, and a cold aura on his body was fully revealed. The battle between the two people seemed to be about to start. At this time, the air between the two of them seemed to freeze instantly. The tomb keeper took a step forward. He glanced in Lin Yu's direction, and then sighed heavily. "Your identity is extraordinary, that's why the Lord is like this, please don't mind it." And just when Lin Yu wanted to walk away, an elegant female voice sounded in his mind. "Obtaining the vast blue wolf pearl will reward the host with 1,000,000 points. Friendly reminder, the vast blue wolf pearl is in this ancient tomb. The host has only 3 chances to fail the mission. After 3 times, the system will be automatically destroyed." After hearing what the system said, Lin Yu was so angry that he wanted to curse. At this time, 3 black lines appeared on his forehead, and a bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. His eyes were full of helplessness, but there was nothing he could do. This is really not good. At this time, Lin Yu forcibly suppressed the anger in his chest. He tried his best to restrain his emotions, and then looked at King Guzhu. "I can help you do something, but there is one thing you have to promise me. If you promise me, I will continue to walk with you. If you don't agree, don't blame me for turning my face against you." Lin Yu's eyes were staring straight at King Guzhu. At this time, King Guzhu just smiled suddenly, and then nodded gently. "Tell me, what do you want me to promise you? If I can promise you, I will naturally promise you. If I can't promise you, there is nothing I can do." Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 200. The next things are all at my disposal. If you can do this, then we can continue. If you can't even do this, then don't blame me for being rude. King Guzhu said softly. At this time, the tomb guard seemed to have remembered something. He suddenly took a step forward and reached the side of King Guzhu. "My lord, in my opinion, we'd better be careful about this matter. After all, there are some things that we can't say easily right now." As the tomb keeper said this, he glanced towards Lin Yu, and something complicated seemed to flash in his eyes. And at this moment, the snake man seemed to suddenly remember something. "My lord, we may be speeding up our actions. Explorers from other countries seem to have broken in. Their identities should be the same as this guy's." And at this moment, a piece of news appeared on the world's public screens, affecting everyone's hearts. Explore the ancient tombs and obtain 3 gold medals before you can proceed to the next round of tasks, the world game. If you succeed, you will get a shelter. After everyone saw the news, almost everyone was completely boiling at the same time. All the people immediately moved in the direction of the ancient tomb, and at the same time, countless people started live broadcasting at the same time, especially the World Channel, which was completely occupied by the live broadcast. At this time, after Lin Yu saw this scene, a bit of surprise flashed in his eyes. His brows were knitted together, and his eyes were filled with a complicated look. At this time, he couldn't help but frown slightly. What's going on? There must be someone behind it. Otherwise, things would never be like this. When Lin Yu thought of this, his brows knitted together, and a bit of complexity flashed in his eyes. At this moment, several figures suddenly flashed from a distance. After seeing those figures, Lin Yu's face sank slightly, and then the editor turned to look at the king of Guzhu. "Now you'd better calm down their emotions. If you can't calm down these guys now, I'm afraid." Guzhu dynasty looked in the direction Lin Yu was looking. After glancing in this way, his face darkened, and a bit of coldness flashed in his eyes. The corners of his mouth also curled up. A hint of a sneer. "It doesn't matter. They are just some low-class people. Although their identity is the same as yours and they are not the aboriginal people of this world, but so what? These don't seem to be important." At this time, when Lin Yu heard what King Guzhu said, a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and then his eyes were fixed on King Guzhu. "Interesting, I understand what you want to say, but General Yin Yang cannot kill him, so I can only tell you this." The king of Guzhu took a deep breath and calmed down his mood a little. A bit of coldness flashed across his face. "Okay, I will promise you for today." After General Yin Yang heard what Lin Yu said, his eyes seemed to be a little complicated, and a few different colors flashed between his eyebrows. It wasn't until a moment later that General Yin Yang slowly walked to Lin Yu's side. He turned his head and stared directly at Lin Yu. His eyes were quite complicated. For a moment, he was really, "I don't know how to talk to Lin Yu." Lin Yu just turned his head and glanced at General Yin Yang, and then waved his hand gently. General Yin Yang followed Lin Yu and walked up. "Thank you for what happened just now. If it weren't for you, I would be in trouble." Lin Yu just turned his head and glanced at General Yin Yang, with a vague smile on his lips and a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Thank me for what? I volunteered to help you with this matter." After General Yin Yang heard what Lin Yu said, he just waved his hand gently and smiled. "No matter what, I still have to thank you." Lin Yu just waved his hand casually. And just after this moment, as if he remembered something, he turned his head and glanced towards General Yin Yang. "I have something to ask you for now. No matter what you say, it doesn't matter. What's going on with you? I don't believe there are such loyal people nowadays, so you must be hiding something from me. Tell me what it is." Lin Yu's gaze was as blazing as a torch, and his eyes were firmly fixed on General Yin Yang. At this time, General Yin Yang also coughed lightly after hearing what Lin Yu said. "Ahem, I don't want to go into details about this matter. But in short, I can help you this time. For now, I can only say so much, and you can figure out the rest by yourself." General Yin Yang stared directly at Lin Yu, and a moment later, Lin Yu's lips also evoked a faint smile. "Interesting, it's really interesting. I'm very curious as to why you had to help me in the first place. I can't understand this matter at all. If it's convenient, Can you clear up my doubts? General Yin Yang's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what General Yin Yang said, his eyes narrowed to a slit, and a bit of complexity flashed in his eyes. Because I don't really believe in this so-called King of Guzhu. I don't know if this is a valid reason. I think you should also understand what I mean. I hope you can tell me the true identity of King of Guzhu. The eyes of both parties looked at each other like this. A moment later, General Yin Yang seemed to have remembered something, and he sighed heavily at that time. There was a wry smile on the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were full of helplessness. Well, there are many things in this that I can't say are good. I just feel that this is a helpless move. I'm afraid it's a bit. At this time, the King of Guzhu walked towards the two of them with a smile. The King of Guzhu came to Lin Yu and patted him gently on the shoulder.